Hello everyone, nod-krai's advisor for the Adventurous Guild, Linnea, will be the one new 5-star character of patch Luna 6. Before Luna 6, both Lunar Charged and Lunar Bloom already have one limited 5-star DPS and 5-star support for their respective reactions, but lunar-crystallize only has a 5-star DPS. Linnea's release will complete the previously empty role of lunar-crystallize as the limited 5-star support for the reaction. To see how strong Linnea is in this niche, in this guide I will be covering how Linnea works, the best ways to build her potential best teams, and analyzing her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Pretty much everything you need to know with detailed analysis that is backed by DC, including plenty of pre-release calcs on Linnea. Linnea is a 5-star Geobow character who ascends with crit rate with defense scaling abilities. She is a 5-star support for lunar-crystallize, so she has the typical Moonsign passive where she counts for Ascending Gleam, enables a team to trigger lunar-crystallize, and buffs its base damage by up to 14% if she has at least 2000 defense. To give a quick summary and reminder on what this lunar reaction does, lunar-crystallize only triggers with Geo plus Hydro. The reaction spawns turrets called Moondrifts that deal damage to enemies after triggering additional lunar crystallize reactions. Ultimately, 3 lunar crystallize reactions equals a damage proc, which is called Moondrift Harmony. For a more detailed explanation of lunar crystallize, I recommend watching my separate video on the 3 lunar reactions. Linnea also grants an EM buff based on 5% of her defense with her A4 passive. The recipient of this buff depends on the active character. If the active character is a Moonsign character, then this character will get the EM buff. If the active character isn't a Moonsign character, Linnea herself will get the EM buff. Linnea is a straightforward character to play and understand. Her elemental skill summons her companion Lumi. While Lumi is on the field, she will reduce nearby Geo enemies' res by 15% with her A1 passive. If the team has Ascendant Gleam, you'll get an additional 15% Geo res shred for a total of 30%. Lumi deals off-field Geo damage in 2 different ways depending on how you use Linnea's skill. If you tap the skill once, Lumi gets summoned in her super power form and will periodically attack an enemy, dealing 2 hits of AoE Geo damage. But if there are Moondrifts on the field from triggering Lunar Crystallize, then Lumi will occasionally perform an AoE attack that does direct lunar crystallize damage instead of regular Geo damage. With Moondrifts on the field, Lumi will do a lunar crystallize attack, then regular Geo attacks again, then back to the lunar crystallize attack, repeating the cycle as long as Moondrifts are present nearby. The time interval between each hit varies depending on the type of attack, and this seems to range from about 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds between hits. The one thing that was reported during pre-release is that in 18 seconds, tap skill results in 4 lunar crystallize attacks and 6 Geo attacks, but this is subject to change with post-release testing. In contrast, if you repeatedly tap Linnea's skill instead of just tapping it once, you will feed Lumi to activate her ultimate power form where she does one big instance of lunar crystallize damage. Afterwards, Lumi switches to her standard power form where she deals 2 hits of normal off-field Geo damage periodically like the tap skill, but these Geo attacks will happen less frequently, around every 5.4 seconds based on pre-release info. So tap skill equals more consistent off-field damage, while spam tap skill equals a nuke of damage with less off-field presence afterwards. Linnea's elemental burst simply heals the entire party, scaling with her defense, and then gives additional healing for the active character every second for 12 seconds. If Lumi isn't on the field, Linnea's burst will summon Lumi in her superpower form, the tap skill version. If Lumi was already on the field, the burst will reset Lumi's active duration, maintaining the form she was already in on the field. Lastly, Linnea's exploration passive out of combat allows her aimed shot to have a lower charge time and shoot special arrows. These arrows can be used to capture animals like with the Omni Ubiquity Net, and mine and collect ores in the overworld. That's everything about Linnea's base kit. For talent leveling priority, all her damage comes from her elemental skills, so level that first. Her burst only provides healing, and you would only use it if you needed to heal, so you can just level it until you think the healing is enough for you. Linnea's tap skill and spam tap skill both have their unique pros and cons. Tap skill gives more consistent off-field damage and slightly more Geo application, around 2 more each rotation, allowing Linnea to trigger more reactions, mainly more lunar crystallize procs. Using it also requires less field time. In contrast, continuous tap skill primarily enables Linnea to do a nuke of damage, but has a lower amount of off-field presence afterwards, which results in slightly lower Geo application, meaning fewer potential reactions. It also takes longer to use due to the longer animation, but nuke skill does allow Linnea to front load her damage. In addition, when you consider using Linnea's burst to heal and reset Lumi's duration, tap skill is better for this because using burst to refresh Lumi's tap skill form maintains her consistent off-field Geo damage, meaning you don't have to use tap skill in rotations where you burst. But if you use Linnea's burst to reset Lumi after using her nuke skill, Lumi will remain doing the weaker version of her off-field damage, attacking infrequently. So even if you use Linnea's burst, you still need to spend the time to spam tap skill again for the nuke. So which one is better to use? Both are relatively close in damage, and this does change with Linnea Constellations. While we currently don't have 100% confirmation about some key details about Linnea's skill, if we do assume that the current pre-release info is correct and that in 18 seconds, Linnea's tap skill allows for 4 lunar-crystallize attacks and 6 geo attacks, and that her nuke skill takes about 2 seconds to do, then tap skill looks to deal slightly more damage than nuke skill at C0. Tap skill is ultimately easier and quicker to use, and enables a smoother rotation when incorporating Linnea's burst. But spam tap skill for the nuke can be more beneficial in certain scenarios. Front-loading Linnea's damage can be useful to meet certain breakpoints in a fight, and some teams may want the lower geo application. But again, this is the case if these current assumptions about Linnea's skill is true, so things may change after post-release testing. If we consider Linnea Constellations, C2 gives more value to tap skill versus nuke skill, C4 closes the gap, and C6 makes nuke skill better, but the C6 damage difference can be diminished with any vertical investment you have in Linnea's teammates, like a signature weapon on Zibai. Speaking of Linnea's constellations, let's go over them. C1 gives Linnea defense scaling quill buffs after using her skill or when triggering Moondrift Harmony, which as a reminder is when the damage from lunar-crystallizes moondrifts occur after triggering 3 lunar-crystallize reactions. These quills can be consumed to buff her nuke skill damage or the party's direct lunar-crystallize damage from their abilities. C2 gives Hydro and Geo characters in the party 40% crit damage after triggering Moondrift Harmony. Linnea's nuke skill damage also gains 150% crit damage with C2, and with Ascending Gleam active, whenever Lumi does a lunar-crystallize attack with her nuke skill or her tap skill form, C2 will trigger an additional instance of Moondrift Harmony for more damage. Because nuke skill only does one instance of lunar-crystallize damage in the nuke, but tap skill has multiple instances of off-field lunar-crystallize damage, tap skill gains more value from C2. C3 grants 3 skill talent levels, C4 gives Linnea and the active character 25% defense after triggering Moondrift Harmony. If Linnea is on field, she stacks both bonuses on herself. C5 grants 3 burst talent levels, and C6 basically just enhances her C1 quill buffs, increasing their scaling and allowing you to both gain and consume more of them for a lot more damage. With Ascended Gleam, C6 also elevates the team's lunar crystallize damage by 25%. Overall, C1 gives a fairly underwhelming team damage increase as the constellation is mainly designed for her C6, which of course is very strong. But Linnea's weak C1 is mainly made up for with her very strong C2 for her early vertical investment. And as I mentioned before, with the current Linnea skill assumptions, C2 has more value for tap skill because it can trigger more instances of the additional Moondrift Harmony procs from C2. C4 closes the damage gap between tap skill and nuke skill because Linnea will gain both defense bonuses from C4 when using her nuke skill, and C6 further gives increased damage to Linnea's nuke skill, making it better than tap skill at C6. But if you have vertical investment in Linnea's teammates like Zibai's signature, the damage gap between nuke skill and tap skill will diminish because teammate investment increases the damage of the Moondrift Harmony procs from C2 and from normally triggering the lunar crystallize reaction, which favors tap skill more. Now, let's cover Linnea's best build options. For weapons, her signature Golden Frostbound Oath is her clear best in slot. Crit damage substat and the unique passive gives 16% defense, 40% damage bonus to regular geo damage and lunar crystallize damage for Linnea after she uses her skill, and if there are any moondrifts on the field, the team will also get 20% damage bonus to regular geo damage and lunar crystallize damage. Great for both Linnea's personal damage and the team's damage with its buffs. Now, since Linnea is defense scaling, deals lunar damage, and doesn't really need ER since her burst is just healing, she doesn't have amazing alternative weapon choices. For example, Aqua Simulacra and Hunter's Path are fine as crit statistics, and Elegy is decent with its buff, especially with higher invested DPSes, but at baseline investment, all these weapons are only just slightly better than her best free-to-play option, Slingshot, which is solid for Linnea just because it gives a ton of crit rate, which buffs Linnea's regular geo damage and direct lunar crystallize damage from her skill. Here is a complete weapon comparison done by Meowtwo's based on Linnea's team DPS in a Zibai team. Ultimately, her signature is the best gain for team damage, and most of her 5-star bowl alternatives only perform slightly better than Slingshot. So TLDR, if you don't have Linnea's signature, use Slingshot. For those considering Linnea's early vertical investment by getting her signature or constellations, if we compare Linnea vertical with just having one additional 5-star pull, getting Linnea's signature is better than getting her C1, since C1's team damage gain itself is pretty low, while Linnea's signature is decently better than her other options. But if we consider 2 additional 5-star pulls, C2 R0 Linnea is better for team damage compared to C1 R1 Linnea, since her C2 is a very strong constellation. So if you want to vertically invest into Linnea, prioritize her constellations if you're planning for C2, otherwise prioritize her signature. For artifacts, Linnea actually has a lot of viable choices that are all close in performance. The two main sets for her are 4-piece Husk and 4-piece Morning Star. 4-piece Husk gives regular Geo damage bonus and defense, while 4-piece Morning Star gives off-field lunar reaction damage bonus and requires Ascended Gleam for full value. The buff from 4-piece Morning Star does linger for 3 seconds while on field, so it can still buff Linnea's Nuke skill if you use it in time. Both are very similar in terms of damage, though with Linnea Constellations, Husk does become better. 2-piece defense, 2-piece EM, 4-piece scroll just for the 12% damage buff, and 4-piece golden troop are also viable options. Linnea can also use 4-piece Silken Moon Serenade if necessary, but you ideally want to use the set on another party member if possible. Here is an artifact comparison based on Linnea's team damage in a Zibai team done by Meowtus, and as you can see, there are minimal differences between the different sets on Linnea, so you should ultimately use the one you have the best substats for. But for those of you that want to grind and optimize for a best in slot set, assuming another party member is using 4-piece Silken Moon Serenade so Linnea doesn't need to use it, I recommend 4-piece Husks, especially on a Moonsign DPS team like Zibai, because the extra defense increases the EM buff for Zibai, which is especially meaningful with high investment into her. The extra defense also makes it valuable if you have Linnea's Constellations like her C1, and Husk is in a strong box, making it easier to get higher quality pieces. For main stats, Linnea wants Defense Hourglass, Defense Goblet, and then Crit or Defense Circlet. Both Circlet types are viable and close in performance. In Geo teams, Crit Circlet is generally better at C0 and C6, while Defense Circlet is generally better at the other constellation levels. The substats you want on Linnea are Crit, Defense, and EM. Defense percent can be as good of a stat as Crit for Linnea, especially when she's supporting a Moonsign DPS like Zibai, where more defense on Linnea means a higher EM buff for Zibai. Because Linnea's burst only heals, you technically only need to use it if you need the healing, so Linnea doesn't really need to build any energy recharge. 0 extra ER is enough for her to burst every other rotation, though it is recommended that in a Zibai team against the Moon Gecko in Stygian Onslaught Dispatch, you get around 125 ER on Linnea to have her burst ready for the boss's healing requirement. Other than that, if you do need to burst every rotation for healing, for example in Farina teams, or if you need to use it to maintain better uptime of Harbinger of Dawn on your main DPS, then you'll need around 150 to 170 plus ER. Finally, let's go over Linnea's best team comps. Linnea is first and foremost the 5-star support for lunar-crystallize, so her obvious best team is with the lunar-crystallize DPS, Zibai. Binnea will be the best in slot Hydro support for the team, with Aino being the alternative. For the final support slot, if you were fortunate enough to get C6 Itlua, he will be the highest damage option, holding 4-piece Silken Moon Serenade so Linnea and Binnea can hold damage-oriented artifact sets. If you don't have C6 Itlua, both C2 Shilonen and C6 Goro are two solid alternative 4-slot supports that also provide extra interruption resistance, which is helpful for Zibai. They can use either 4-piece Instructors or 4-piece Silken Moon Serenade. Just remember that Linnea should use 4-piece Silken Moon Serenade if you use Instructors on C2 Shilonen or Goro. If you have Chiori, she can also be a good choice and can be a holder of Silken Moon Serenade. Even without C6 Itlua, he's still fine to use at C2+, so he can hold 4-piece Silken Moon Serenade, though he's slightly behind C6 Goro in terms of damage. With further constellations like C4, the damage difference gets more minimal until Itlua's C6 breakpoint. Other than that, if you don't have C6 Goro or C2 Itlua, you can still use them without their key constellations, they just won't be nearly as strong. But you can also consider other Geo supports like Zhongli, another Hydro support like Xingqiu, or another elemental off-fielder like Nefer, as Linnea kind of serves as a better version of C6 Itlua, allowing her to fulfill his role while being an upgrade if she's substituting for him. In general, you should focus on just Hydro and Geos on the team to maximize lunar-crystallize reaction damage, but if an enemy requires another elemental check, you do have the option to flex this last support slot. While Linnea provides the most value to Zibai teams, she also serves as a solid support for other Geo DPSs by providing Geo Res Shred, enabling lunar-crystallize, and bringing her own personal damage, generally in combination with Binnea. Ito benefits especially well with Linnea in a triple Geo team with either C6 Itlua or C6 Goro, allowing for a considerable damage upgrade for him. Double Hydro Ito with Linnea should work fine as well, though without the extra buffs from C6 Itlua or C6 Goro, Linnea isn't as strong compared to the Ito triple Geo team. Navia can similarly work with Linnea as a support alongside Binnea and Farina. In my opinion, she doesn't gain as much value from Linnea as Ito, since compared to Shilonen in the same slot, while both provide Geo Res Shred, Shilonen also provides Hydro Res Shred and a 40% damage percent buff with 4-piece Scroll, further buffing both Navia's and Farina's damage. Linnea doesn't do this, but makes up the difference with her own personal damage and the damage from the lunar-crystallize reaction. But still, the Linnea-Binnea duo is strong for Navia. If you do have C6 Itlua, triple Geo with him instead of Farina can work fine for Navia as well, though double Geo looks stronger and doesn't require C6 Ilua. Similar double or triple Geo teams with Linnea will also work with Noelle and Ningguang as the Geo main DPS, and though it's not her main recommended role, for those of you that want to on-field Linnea, you can do so with Columbina, Goro, and Ilua. Linnea herself can still support the Geo DPSs as the only Moonsign character, but she will be less of a damage upgrade because you lose half of her Geo res rate without 2 Moonsign characters on the team. While Linnea mostly benefits Geo teams, she can be played with non-Geo characters as a wheelchair duo with Columbina. Similar to the Columbina plus Nefer or Binnea duo, the Columbina plus Linnea or Binnea duo can also carry units as they both deal decent off-field damage and buff each other's lunar-crystallize damage. The best example of this is for the master of all wheelchairs, Neuvillette, as he will have yet another alternative functional team with Columbina and Linnea. While the Binnea duo can be an effective support core for teams against certain enemies such as ones who have mechanics requiring Geo, generally, the Binnea wheelchair duo is overall worse than the Binnea duo. For Binnea, the lunar-crystallize reaction necessitates 3 triggered reactions every time in order for damage to occur. So in teams that aren't focused on just applying Hydro and Geo, you are unable to fully benefit from lunar-crystallize reaction damage. In contrast, for Binnea, the lunar charge reaction only requires enemies to be affected by Hydro and Electro. While this is still an elemental restriction, it is somewhat easier to meet, so more teams can take more advantage of the lunar charge reaction damage, and it can also provide further reaction synergies like Overvape with Pyro. In addition, part of Linnea's power in her kit comes from providing Geo res shred, so in teams that don't have a Geo DPS, you lose part of Linnea's value. In contrast, Nefer's kit mainly just focuses on damage, so generally the Binnea wheelchair will overall do more damage than the Binnea wheelchair. Linnea can also technically work solo in non-lunar crystallized teams where she just does her nuke skill and serves the role as a normal off-field Geo sub-DPS. It's usable, but I wouldn't recommend Linnea for this role as her main strength is for lunar crystallize. Lastly, because Linnea's A4 passive allows her to give an EM buff to the active character if they are a Moonsign character, she is able to serve as an EM buffer and healer for the other 2 lunar main DPSs, Flins and Nefer, prioritizing her nuke skill since Geo application is not needed. You can play the 2 Snowland Fae together if you want, but it isn't the best Flins team recommendation because Nefer already serves as a sustain with her shield, and lunar charge gains a lot of value from an anima support like Sucrose. For Nefer though, who doesn't have amazing sustain options, Linnea can be a decent 4th slot for her. She currently looks better than Kuki and on par with a Nefer as the 4th slot sustain option for Nefer, but of course she will do less damage than sustainless options like Nahida and Sucrose. I don't recommend pulling Linnea specifically for Nefer, but she's usable if you want a healer on the team. For those of you interested in more specific team DPS calcs regarding Linnea and Linnea with Zibai, I have linked 3 different sheets from 3 different theorycrafters in the description below. As always, remember that different theorycrafters will have different assumptions, so don't directly compare their results. And of course, calcs will differ from actual gameplay. First is from Meowtooth, who has a collection of all her most recent character calcs and written guides in a single sheet. As of recording this, it isn't yet updated with links to Linnea stuff, but I have seen them already and the sheet will be updated soon. The second sheet here is made by theorycrafter Emma, who has done various Linnea team calcs with Zibai using nuke skill Linnea, and uniquely she has focused more on team calcs with vertical investment such as with Linnea's signature, Zibai's signature, and Zibai's Constellations. She has even done various C6 Zibai calcs for the bigger spenders of the game, as well as calcs for C6 Shiori main DPS teams for those of you that have her. More Linnea calcs such as with Goro, Navia, and Binnea wheelchairs will be added in the future. And then third is a sheet by theorycrafter Neko, who made a sheet for Zibai vertical investment including Linnea's release. He has done various team calcs and compared them based on team costs, aka the number of 5-star pulls of each team. So you can get a general idea of how good different teams are at a specific cost for both non-C6 Lua and with C6 Lua teams. More info including written notes on each investment are also in the other tabs. Keep in mind that these calcs are done at KQM standard, so things can change at different investment levels and in actual gameplay. In general though, starting with just Zibai, the ideal order of investment should be first getting Columbina, then getting Linnea. Then for further early vertical investment, prioritize Zibai's signature weapon and constellations such as C2R1, then Linnea C2R1, and then lastly Columbina C2R1. To conclude this Linnea guide, here is my analysis on her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Overall, Linnea is a strong 5-star lunar crystallized support. She has good personal damage, gives Geo res shred, gives EM to the on-feeder if they are a Moonsign character, enables lunar crystallize and buffs his damage with her passive, and can heal the team if needed with her burst. Linnea can function outside of lunar crystallized teams as a generic Geo sub-DPS and an EM buffer and sustain for Flins and Nefer, but it is far from optimal for her as Linnea's main strength is in lunar crystallized teams. The Linnea plus Columbina duo is yet another wheelchair duo in the game that can be good in the right scenarios for various DPSs such as Nefer, though generally it isn't as strong or versatile as the Nefer plus Columbina duo. Linnea gains the most value in lunar-crystallize teams where she supports a Geo main DPS. Characters like Ito, Navia, Noelle, and Ningguang can benefit from Linnea's Geo res threat and contribute to proccing lunar-crystallize reactions for more overall team damage. Some teams like Ito look to gain more value from Linnea than others, but regardless, Linnea is a potent Geo support for all the older Geo carries. Their Linnea teams aren't insanely OP in terms of damage, but Linnea provides all the older Geo DPSs a much needed buff and enables another option for them to compete against Lunar Shill. But of course, the one Geo DPS that benefits the most from Linnea as a specialized lunar-crystallize support is Zibai, the lunar-crystallize DPS, as she greatly benefits from everything that Linnea's base kit offers and gets more access to vertical investment with Linnea's signature and Constellations. For those who don't have all the previous best supports for Zibai like C6 Ilua, Linnea is an amazing option that counteracts the significant damage loss from not having key supports like C6 Ilua, C6 Goro, or Columbina. But in regards to her theoretical best team, before Linnea's release, C0 Zibai's best team was around 140 to 145k DPS at KQM standard, assuming you had access to C6 Ilua, which was difficult. With Linnea, Zibai's best team with C6 Ilua currently calcs at around 170k DPS at KQM standard. This is one of the highest DPS numbers using KQM standard we've seen yet, with the only two current teams closest to this are very optimized Mawika and Nefer plus Sucrose teams that can calc above 160k DPS. As a result, I do expect people to label Zibai with Linnea's release as the newest best DPS in the game based on these numbers, as well as bring up power creep concerns. However, I personally don't think that these DPS numbers make Zibai the definitive new best DPS, nor is it an example of extreme power creep, as there are very important caveats and context to consider. First, the highest Zibai DPS calcs have her on Harbinger of Dawn, which gives crit rate when she's above 90% HP. Some calcs of Harbinger of Dawn don't use Linnea's burst for healing, which is unrealistic. Some do incorporate it every couple of rotations, but whether it is actually enough healing to maintain uptime depends on you and the actual fight. If you need to use Linnea's burst more often or get hit a lot and get below 90% HP in practice, the theoretical damage of Zibai's team decreases. Now there are plenty of calcs with Zibai using the not long craftable, which doesn't have the HP requirement, and these calcs are close to 170k DPS as well. But these calcs assume that Linnea doesn't use her burst at all, so if you need Linnea's healing in practice, the theoretical damage of Zibai's team decreases. Second, the best Zibai teams all use C6 Ilua, and of course getting C6 of a new 4-star is very difficult, even if Ilua happens to be on Linnea's banner, so many people probably won't have him as C6. And third and most importantly, theoretical team DPS is not the most important factor for meta evaluation. When you evaluate Genshin's meta, you have to consider the context of the endgame content you're playing the characters in, where the meta is actually the most relevant, and to me, this is Stygian Onslaught. In patch Luna 6, the Radiant Moon Gecko will be one of the bosses, which has both a healing requirement and favors geo damage. This boss is the main reason Linnea will be very valuable to pull for the patch, not only for Zibai, but for most teams that will go against this boss. But with the shield design of Stygian Onslaught, even if Zibai teams with Linnea calc at 170k DPS using KQM standard, the team is still dependent on enemy matchup. Having high DPS doesn't mean anything if a boss mechanic counters the team unless you have a lot of vertical investment. This is not to say that Linnea with Zibai doesn't introduce any power creep though. Linnea does still further increase the game's overall damage ceiling by buffing Zibai, though this seems to be the continuing norm with newer character releases. Zibai will undoubtedly be one of the best DPSs in the game with Linnea, but it's important to remember that team DPS from a calc is not the sole factor that characters should be evaluated by in terms of meta. Ultimately, I don't think Linnea is some insanely overpowered or meta-breaking support, but she's definitely pretty strong. Her main pull value is for Zibai teams, but she's also great for all the older Geo DPSs, and she does have some use cases outside of Geo teams, such as forming a wheelchair core with Columbina. That's everything I wanted to cover about Linnea. A big thanks to the theorycrafters who allowed me to cite and reference their calcs in this video, specifically Meowtwo's, Emma, and Neko. All of them are amazing, awesome TCers, so I highly suggest checking their calcs out in their links below. I hope this guide and analysis was helpful to you all in giving you a better understanding of everything related to Linnea. Just clicking and watching the video helps the channel out immensely, and if you want to show even more support, consider liking or sharing the video, or click the subscribe button for more Genshin guide and analysis videos in the future. Leave any questions in the comments, and for all of you planning on wishing, I wish you all the best of luck on your Linnea pools.